I'm not going to do any big introduction. You guys know Steve. He is, you know him, you love him. Take it away, Steve Kaufmann.
Good afternoon. All right. Anyone here not understand English? Yeah, I just want to make sure that, How many people here speak at least 2 languages? How many people here speak 3 or more languages? So actually, we're a gathering of polyglots. How many people who raised their hands grew up in a monolingual environment? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So I just wanted to confirm something that I believe, and that is, while it's tremendous to, spend your early childhood in a multilingual environment, if you don't, that doesn't mean you can't learn languages. And so we're proof of that. So, comprehensible input, how does it work? I don't know. We have Dr. Krashen with us, who has done a tremendous amount of research, which I regularly refer to. His work, Benico Mason, who is a colleague, correct? And she has done a lot of work with learners, and it does, this research does demonstrate that, in fact, comprehensible input works very well, and it's sometimes counterintuitive because we've been taught to believe that deliberate learning is more effective. So, I didn't know that I was going to have the man sitting right in front of me, so I will move past his picture to a younger picture where we have a number of quotes that this comes from Dr. Krashen's website, but it's essentially the themes that he has been stressing in his talks and that many of us are familiar with. Language acquisition does not require extensive use of conscious grammatical rules and does not require tedious drills. I never do drills. I do use Teach Yourself and other books. I never do the questions. I never do the drills. Acquisition requires meaningful interaction in the target language, natural communication. Again, I think these are themes that have been discussed. The emphasis is on natural communication, and in particular, the last one, in the real world, conversations with sympathetic native speakers who are willing to help the acquirer understand are very helpful. And I believe that's the case, but the methods do not force early production in the second language. I think that's also very important. At least it matches my learning style. I normally am not anxious to start speaking in the language until I have a certain critical mass of vocabulary and the ability to understand what the other person is saying. Now, what is the best age to learn? And that's why I asked the question at the beginning. And there, at various times, people have said you have to learn before the age of 5 or before the age of this or that. I even had someone on my YouTube channel or somewhere say, I don't think older people can learn languages. This is a couple of years ago. And I said, what's old to you? He said, 40. He was convinced that after 40 you were done. Apparently, there are 2 stages in the development of our brains where you have this sprouting of synapses and which are then pruned. And the synapses that are pruned, and I'm not scientific and I say something that doesn't make sense, someone will correct me, but the synapses that are pruned are the ones that you don't use. So this suggests, at least in theory, that at an early age, if you aren't using your language learning or creating language learning synapses, then there will be some neural networks that will be pruned, which suggests that you will miss an opportunity. Then scientists discovered that there's a second stage where this happens, that's around puberty. And now they're discovering that, in fact, some of this pruning takes place in our 20s. They'll eventually discover that it takes place, all lifelong. But I think that the point there is that you have to, it's often an advantage to take it, to learn as a child or to learn as a 12-year-old. But if you go past that stage, think of the famous story of the London cab drivers who are forced to learn 2,000 odd streets in London, and they discovered that portion of the brain, the hippocampus or whatever it is, that processes that kind of information is enlarged in their brains. And they didn't study the maps of London when they were children. And yet they were able, whatever, in their 20s, because they then committed themselves to, ingesting this information, their brain adapted. And, the brain learns all the time. So I have a picture here of the Bixby system. And online, I bought a 3-day pass to the rent-a-bike Bixby system here in Montreal. And I read the explanation of how to, get my bike. And I went down to the Bixby station. I could not get the bike. It just wouldn't do it. I couldn't make it work. There's a phone number. I phoned. It was explained to me. I did, okay, thank you very much. I did it again. I couldn't get my bike. I couldn't get the bike out of the system. I phoned her 3 times. And finally, the lady kindly said, she figured I was some old geezer that couldn't figure these new, systems out. We'll cancel your 3-day pass. I said, thank you. And then I bought a 1-day pass, got on my bike, and then I went to my destination, but I took the absolute wrong route. I went up to the top of Drummond and discovered that whatever it is, McTavish takes me right back down again. And then I went up University or something, comes right back down again to where I should have been, which was, go along Sherbrooke to Park and then go up. So all I'm saying is I've learned all that now. Like the brain learns. All the things that I did there, that is a process of learning. The brain learns from the experiences, from the things that it encounters in its life. We're learning all the time. And even as a 71-year-old, I learned how to get a bike out of the Bixby system. So we're constantly learning, and that also applies to language learning. And I always like to talk about the 3 keys to language learning. The first one, is that? There we go. Yeah, the person who helped me with these said that stuff would start popping up onto the screen, so fortunately that's what happened. Attitude is number 1. It's how, determined, motivated, you like the language, you don't like the language, you like someone in the language, you think you can learn, you like the system you're using. All of these attitudinal things are so important, like it's almost 70%. And of course, the second thing is time. You have to spend a lot of time. There is no learning in a week. It takes a lot of time. It's cumulative. We study something today. We don't know when that's going to click in and actually stick with us. It takes a lot of time. And the third thing, which is a little more difficult to explain, is this idea of learning to notice. Because if we don't notice something, we can't learn it. And there's many things that we simply don't notice. Many things our brain starts to notice. It's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. At first, it's all a big blank. A few things start to appear, as in a jigsaw puzzle. A few more things start to appear. Then you notice that this piece, fits over there. So there's a gradual process of developing the ability to notice. And those are the 3 things that enable us to be good language learners. Now what happens? Oh, there we go. So attitude, if you think you can't do it, obviously you're not going to do it. You have to have the attitude that you can do it. You have to put in the time, and you have to develop the ability to notice. So, and the other thing I think is very important is that we're constantly forgetting and relearning and forgetting and relearning. And the process of ingesting the comprehensible input is this process that we don't control, whereby we see certain words, then we don't see them for a while, we forget them, they show up again, we once again remember what they mean, and gradually we start to learn. And so I decided, being from Vancouver and now I'm in Montreal, I put up the logos of the 2 professional hockey teams. I was only going to put the Vancouver Canucks there, but I thought that might, meet a very unfriendly reaction here. But I've often compared language learning to an upside-down hockey stick. So that in the first part of the hockey stick, the blade of the hockey stick, the steep part, we are suddenly discovering a new language. It's hard work. It's very fuzzy at first, and slowly we start to make sense of the language. We feel very happy that we're able to understand something that we couldn't understand at all, like, say, a month earlier. We're able to say a few things, and this is that sort of steep, sharp climb. And during that period, and this is where we get to the sense of compelling input, as a learner, I can deal with uninteresting content because I am compelled. I am so interested and motivated by the fact that I'm discovering this new language that the stories can be a little silly. they can be not, it's not gripping, it's not Anna Karenina, you know, it's just a story. I can deal with it because I'm motivated. But once we get to this long, long period where we have to acquire so much vocabulary, and at times we don't feel we're making any progress, that's where we have to engage ourselves with content that is in itself interesting. So I am interested in Ukrainian history. I'm going to read Ukrainian history. I'm going to listen to audiobooks on Ukrainian history. I'm learning about Ukrainian history. And incidentally, I'm learning Ukrainian words, and I'm learning Ukrainian. And so it's that period in particular, I believe, that you have to have this very, very interesting content that you choose yourself. And I also compared it, and that's why I put that picture up there, to cross-country skiing. If any of you have been cross-country skiing, there are portions that are a steep climb, and it's hard work, and then there's portions where you just kind of, you know, skiing along comfortably, and which I have done, by the way. I have skied hundreds of kilometers listening to Russian novels and so forth, cross-country skiing. But it is a sense that you have that initial struggle, and then you go through a period which you want to be enjoyable. And compelling content is what enables you to continue. And so, I again want to mention this noticing aspect. You know, if you walk through a forest, at first you don't notice certain flowers or certain trees. And if you walk there often enough, you'll start to notice more and more. And I think language learning is very much a matter of learning to notice more and more things. So if I refer to my own learning experience, right now the newest language that I'm dealing with is Hebrew. And so I'm very much at the beginning, 2 weeks I've been into it, I'm very much at the sort of beginning stage of that steep climb. So I'm dealing with comprehensible input that becomes comprehensible because I can look up the word. So here, for example, at Link is a Hebrew lesson. And what I'm using is, we have created these very simple stories in a format that's very similar to the TPRS format that was explained. Well, no, it wasn't you, it was Paul Doucette, who was explaining TPRS in a classroom where they tell stories with a lot of repetition. And these are stories which we have had translated into 30-odd languages. And each story consists of 3 parts. The story tries to be clever, witty, ironic, something to give it a little bit of flavor, but it's essentially a story that says, you know, Steve went to the store, Steve bought a shirt, he came home, he discovered a hole in the shirt, he went back to the store, they wouldn't give him his money back. That's a story. Then it's, I went to the store, and it's the same vocabulary, but it's I telling the story. And then we say, Steve went to the store and he bought a shirt. Did he buy a pair of pants? No, he bought a shirt. And so it's very easy because the answer is provided in the question. Or, did he buy a shirt? Yes, he bought a shirt. And so these stories with audio, we have 60 of them. And I have done this for Greek, and now I'm doing it for Hebrew. So for me, at my stage, my beginner stage in the language, accompanied by audio, with the ability to look up the words and save words and phrases, it's compelling to me. It works. I look forward to going back there. However, I'm now at the stage in my Greek where that's no longer good enough. So you'll notice that in the Hebrew, there are a number of blue words. These are words that I don't yet know in Link. Yellow words are words that I have looked up and saved and that I'm in the process of learning. Anything that's white is a word that I now feel that I know. So if I go on to my Greek environment, there are no more blue words. Because whatever I'm going through the second time. Essentially, I have either learned the word, and those are words that are now white, or these are words or phrases that I'm in the process of learning. But I'm still dealing with content that becomes compelling because I'm still motivated to get a toehold in this language. Now, if we progress to Russian, which is a language that I've been doing for many, many years, there's hardly a yellow word there. And I'm now well on that, I'm skiing at a great speed, I'm enjoying it simply for the content, simply because it's constantly reinforcing my sense of the language and so forth. So I do believe that the definition of compelling content to some extent depends on where you are in the language. But again, getting back to that hockey stick, fairly soon, and a lot sooner than most learners dare do it, you have to move into that authentic content. But I think to get ramped up, I think even call it, and much like the book that you showed me, Stephen, of your Chinese stories that you're creating, we have to deal with somewhat sheltered material in order to get up to where we can deal with authentic material. And the grammar part of it, again, there are so many grammar resources. The question was asked, you know, do you want a native teacher or a non-native teacher? And the native, as long as the person can explain the grammar, you don't need a lot of grammar explanation. There are so many resources on the internet today. If I look up, I can go French grammar, I can go French conjugations, French verbs, I will find ample explanation. In addition to which, or if I want, yeah, I can get an overview of the grammar, I can go into specific subjects, or if I'm reading, there are online resources like Reversal, Context Reversal, which has a conjugating dictionary. So if I, in the text here, choose a word like, and I don't have my glasses on, but it's, let's see, which one do we have here? So, oui, quelle fille, okay? So fille, somewhere in there the word fille popped up. I go into the dictionary and the highlighted word is the word that I have selected, and so I'm able to immediately identify what is the role of that form of the verb in the context. So I'm just saying that our ability to rely on comprehensible input, in other words, spend the bulk of our learning time simply listening and reading, is so much greater today because of all the resources that are available to us, where we can immediately find out what's, you know, what is this, what tense, what person, and so forth and so on. So the grammar resources are there to enable us to stay in the content. And I think that the best use of our time as language learners is to stay with the content. In my own case, it's about 70% listening and 30% reading, with the occasional reference to grammar things that, you know, are of interest to me. I also do some review of vocabulary, but I don't do a lot of review of vocabulary because I'm always torn. Do I want to spend my time reviewing vocabulary, or do I want to stay in the content? And in many of my languages, again, the way we count them at Link, I have vocabulary of 30, 40, 50,000 words. It's simply not practical to go through, you know, thousands and thousands of words and to review them. So I want to kind of, the idea of grammar, of learning grammar, I firmly believe that we can only learn the grammar once we already know it. And what I mean by that, and I have the example of this Sufi saying, you can only learn what you already know, when we have already experienced the grammar through a lot of comprehensible input, so that we have a sense of how the language works, and we've seen it, and we maybe have some questions about it, and we then go and look at a grammar rule, the grammar rule then starts to make sense. But if you get the grammar rule up front, like if I go into Greek and they tell me that they're in the past tense in Greek, you have the aorist and you have the imperfect, and they kind of look the same to me, and here's all the aorist tenses and here are all the imperfect tenses, I'm intimidated and I simply can't deal with it. But once I've experienced that in the text, then I'm sort of hungry to find an explanation for these things that I've been experiencing. And so at that point I can learn it, because at a subconscious sort of level, I already know that that's how the language works. And so I guess the final point is that there are many different language acquisition tasks that are available to us. We can read, we can listen, we can speak, we can write, use flashcards, memory systems. And I think depending on our disposition, we may find reading fun or not fun. There are people who don't like to read. I like listening when I'm doing the dishes. There are people who can't do that. I don't like doing flashcards. There are lots of people who like doing flashcards. So I think the more we can orient these tasks towards something that we actually enjoy doing, like the quote here, man is most nearly himself when he achieves the seriousness of a child at play. I think if we can get into a mode where we are enjoying what we're doing, we're caught up in it. Again, Stephen Krashen referred to this state of flow where we're doing something that is a little bit difficult for us, but we're coping. That's when we're most concentrated. We're least likely to be distracted. I mean, it's so easy to be distracted today. There was a study done in Germany where they had people sort of pressing a little digital counter every time they were distracted, when their mind wandered to something else when they were on a task of some kind. And it's astounding how our mind wanders. It's so easy to be distracted. And so the more you can have that seriousness of the child at play, you're totally caught up in what you're doing, this content is interesting to you, or the task is something that's just a little bit challenging for you and you're managing to do it, that gives you a great sense of satisfaction and tends to keep you on the task. And of course, there's no point in spending a lot of time on language learning if we're not efficient in our use of that time. So I think the more we can orient ourselves towards those kinds of activities that are enjoyable and satisfying, the better we're going to do. And in my own case, and certainly in terms of the research that Dr. Krashen has done, if we can spend most of that time in a meaningful engagement with meaningful content, we are probably pushing our brain to create the neural connections that we need to do well in the language. And I doubt that time spent with sort of detailed explanation, theoretical explanation of grammar, although it might be very interesting to some people, I don't think it's pushing our brains to create the neural networks that we need to sort of manage, control, and process these new languages. So I think that the way the compelling or comprehensible input works is something that is still a bit of a mystery, but that I think it is the most, I believe, and a lot of the research confirms that it is the most effective way of creating that ability for the brain to handle the new language, more effective than theoretical explanations about how the language works. And that's it. So I think, I just want to stress, and I would encourage everyone to try and find a way to learn languages that suits their interests and that they can find enjoyable and satisfying. And on that basis, their brain will learn. And it doesn't really matter what age you are. And I'm very happy to take any questions.
Okay, questions?
Just a quick one, Stephen. Why were you learning basic Hebrew without the vowels?
Few reasons. First of all, I'm learning Hebrew because I'm going to visit Israel with my wife, and I gather that the vowels are only used for learners, and so my goal is that when I'm in Israel, as I'm wandering around, I might have a chance of reading some of the stuff that's written there. I won't have the vowels, number one. Number two, I looked up on the internet, Hebrew vowels. Well, turns out that they have 18 symbols for 5 vowels. And these symbols are these absolutely microscopic dots. And I said, you know what? I can read Hebrew on Link, and I can press on any word I want and get the text-to-speech. I can save a whole phrase and get the text-to-speech. So I hear it, and I have to train my brain. It's a bit like learning Chinese characters. They're not phonetic either. They're vaguely phonetic. So I'm going to have to get to where I can identify this word as meaning this and pronounce this way without the help of the vowels, so that when I'm in Israel, I might have a chance of being able to read. So that's why. And besides which, practical reason, I'm learning on Link. We don't have the little vowels on Link, so if I'm going to use Link, I won't have the vowels. Yes.
Stephen, so I heard that you've been involved in talking to principals at schools. I see you've been participant of ACFL. So you are, in a way, from my understanding, having some effort to reach into institutions and their language teaching protocols experience. What have you learned, and what have you learned of how to fix it, help it, destroy it, and build it up?
I have not had much success in interesting schools or teachers in Link. At the AC, what is it? American Council of ACTFL, ACTFL, there you do get enthusiasm from individuals that you talk to. And we have teachers who use Link in their classrooms. So we do find individual teachers who are enthusiastic. But I would say, by and large, and this is not just teachers, it's any sort of institution. If you try to speak to the human resource manager, education manager of a company or a government or any of that, they're quite protective of what they do, and they're not that interested in having something else come into their environment. So we have not been tremendously successful. We would love to be more involved, and we don't think that Link is in any way, it doesn't compete. It's a resource. In fact, I follow different people on Twitter in different languages. I follow this one educator in Sweden, and there was a study in Sweden on what causes the greatest stress to teachers. And number one was justifying their evaluations of students. Number two was preparing for class. And like number of kids in a class was way down the list. So we always think, well, teachers are stressed out if they got 28 kids instead of 24 in the classroom. At least in this study in Sweden, that was not the case. So I think the resources that Link, or the kind of functionality and availability of you know, content and the way we track the activity of the learners and stuff actually would help the teachers do their job better. But so far, now maybe I can work with you, but so far that it's the exceptional teacher who finds us on the internet or who I meet at ACTFL that is enthusiastic, but it hasn't been the rule.
Another question up here?
Yeah, Steve, thanks for the inspiration. You mentioned when you're learning your comprehensible input, about 70% you're taking from audio sources. When you're learning a new language here, like Hebrew, how do you make the transition? Initially, I assume it's not comprehensible.
No, it's not comprehensible at all. I started Hebrew and Greek from our mini stories. Now, the first, say, item of content that I learned from needn't be hello, how are you? Not necessary. In some languages, in fact, that poses problems because there are, the hello, how are you might depend on whether you're superior position, inferior position, related, not related. So I don't really need that at all. It can be just a simple little story. I listen to it, I understand zero, of course. And then I start reading and I look up every word. I look up every word. And every word I press on, I hear text-to-speech. So I go through that lesson. The lesson might be 5 lines long. I'm in no position yet. Like in Hebrew, I cannot listen in my car because I don't understand anything. I've done about, I don't know, 20 of these lessons, looking up every word, working my way through what it means, saving words, saving phrases, listening. Maybe one of them I understand if I listen to it without having the opportunity to look up every word. I know from experience, you know, I'm 2 weeks in, 2 months in, I will understand a lot of those. So it's just the time. In Greek, I've done 60 stories. When I started, now I understand all 60 stories. There isn't a blue, you know, unknown word in there. I'm ready to move on. And so it's simply a matter of, it's a sort of gradually getting into the language, not being upset that you don't understand anything you listen to. That I think text-to-speech is a wonderful tool because you can go word by word and then phrase by phrase, and it's almost as if you're listening to the lesson and you're reading it, and you're just allowing the brain gradually to get used to the language. And like Greek has a lot of, but they have some things that are interesting grammatically, the way they put the adjective after the noun, you know, and at first it's a bit strange, and you simply listen to it and listen to it and listen to it, and that's just how they do it. And if I go to speak Greek, which I haven't done much, I did a little bit with a lady who is a teacher of Greek, and that's how it starts to come out, because I've listened to it. But again, if you were to look at how often, like we track how often we listen to different stories, so I've listened to some stories 40, 50 times. So I've listened to it, I've read it, I've underlined it, I've heard, or at least highlighted and heard the text-to-speech, and gradually those patterns are being absorbed by my brain. And so it's just a gradual process. But what's key there is to have the confidence that however much of a blur it is when you start, eventually it will become clear. And I know that because I've done it for many languages. It eventually, you know, the fog lifts, but you have to believe that the fog is going to lift.
Another question over here?
Yep.
Okay, hey Steve. So once you get past the short part of the hockey. I don't know anything about hockey.
Yeah.
I'm
The
black.
blade, yeah, the steep
You know,
part.
from America, I'm black. I don't watch hockey. But
Yeah.
once you get past the puck part of the hockey stick,
Yeah.
and you're into the world of interesting stuff, and say you want to read a book that is complicated, do you try and push through, like you're trying to read Anna Karenina and Russian, and it may be beyond you? Do you try and push through that, or do you go to other stuff? Like, how do you decide what materials you're using when you're using them?
You know, the reason, or one of the reasons why I wanted to develop a system like Link is because I had books at home in German and Spanish, and there were enough words in there that it was annoying to read. Because if you look up the word, first, so I'd do different things. I'd look it up, close the dictionary, and forgot what the meaning was. Or I would make a list of all these words with the intention of looking them all up afterwards. But I never look at the list again. Like, it's hopeless. So until I'm at a level where there's maybe, you know, less than 5% unknown words, I don't like to read away from. I have an iPad. I can buy any book. I buy an ebook. When I was in Polish or Ukrainian or any of these, I look up, you know, ebook stores. I find an ebook, hopefully one where there's also a corresponding audiobook. I can import the ebook into Link. It automatically slots it into 2,000 word chapters, and I work my way through that, and I listen. And so I'm listening, and the audio, the reinforcements, audio and text is very powerful. Until we're very good in the language, it's tremendous to have both. So I wouldn't undertake to read. I might buy a book, say in Polish, but I might read the odd, you know, a few pages or chapter, but I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a little bit annoying always to have words that you don't know and you look them up and then you forget them and stuff. So I don't. I read on Link until I'm so good in the language. I mean, there are languages where I can comfortably read without. I don't use traditional dictionaries. Hardly ever. It's too annoying.
Any more questions? Oh, up in the corner. Make me work for it.
Thank you for all the great information this weekend. I'm just wondering, in your vast experience of working with people learning language and a language acquisition, if you've come across any information about the process of language acquisition for people who have learning disorders, where they might have actually had trouble learning even their own mother tongue, like dyslexia and stuff like that, and if you could give me some information about that end of the spectrum.
You know, I haven't had personal experience dealing with people who have learning disabilities. I have read that insofar as dyslexia is concerned, that where it was traditionally described as the inability to distinguish between letter D and B or something, that it is actually related to hearing. And so there is treatment where they're dealing with certain sounds that are pronounced very quickly and so forth, that they're able to help people. I believe that insofar as, you know, people who have difficulty reading, literacy, you know, people who struggle with literacy, I don't know what people do. I've never been to a literacy program, but I think if you can combine sound with text, that's got to be a big advantage. I think text-to-speech, I don't know what people do with people who are challenged that way, but I think all of those things should be helpful in helping people to read. And reading, to me, is such a powerful way of acquiring knowledge. It affects everything. If we can read well, we'll do well in school. Science, you name it. If we can read well, we'll do well professionally. Not everyone, but overwhelmingly, you know, being able to read well is a very, very important skill. And I think the use of all these tools, like Link, like audio, like text-to-speech, should be there to help people. But I don't have any, you know, personal specific experience.
Question at the top here.
Hi, Steve. Just a comment,
Yeah.
observation. We've been talking a lot about comprehensible input this weekend, and justifiably so. I've felt there's been a slight tendency to describe comprehensible input as a method. And what's been apparent listening to questions that have come up here and elsewhere is that there's still, I think, some way to go from describing your approach to language learning as comprehensible input, and then getting from there to what you actually do, especially at the beginning stages, and from there. So, yeah, that's it.
Well, I think that because obviously anyone, I am very much an input-based learner. I have been on Greek for 3 months, off and on. If I've spoken, I have hardly spoken. However, I do have a grammar book at home, but I've hardly looked at it. But I've kind of peeked at I initially peeked at the conjugation tables, and then I discovered context reverso, which is so much better. So I think it's a matter of emphasis. And I think when we talk about comprehensible input as a learning approach, I don't know if the word method is correct, but it means a major emphasis on comprehensible input as the sort of learning environment that's going to get us to where we want to get to. It's very common in Japan, for example, they have these eigo kaiwa. People think if they come to conversation class, they're going to improve. I don't think that's the case. And I think a lot of those Japanese learners, they go there and they use their same vocabulary over and over again, and that is in itself not going to improve their Japanese. When I lived in Japan, I had an opportunity to speak Japanese a lot, but I spent a lot of time listening and reading. I think that you have to have a deliberate effort to be constantly enriching your vocabulary, your familiarity with the language by exposing yourself to a content-rich environment. And that's why if I were to go and speak to someone in Greek and struggle in a half hour or an hour, we're not going to use very many words. There's going to be a lot of silent periods. Whereas if I spent that hour listening, initially repetitively, because I'm listening to the same stuff over and over again at this stage, that the brain is going to get used to the language. And there will come a point, and I'm at that point right now in Greek, where I want to start speaking. And as I speak, I will discover gaps, I will discover problems, it'll send me back to my content, it'll send me to my grammar resources, but I need to at least get to that stage. And so I think comprehensible input says we don't start with an explanation of the grammar, we start with getting the language in you. And at different stages, you might refer to the grammar, you need to speak, and as you get further along, you speak more and more, and eventually you have to speak a lot in order to become fluent. But certainly in the initial period, if anything, it's comprehensible input, and including, for example, the graded readers that you're producing in different languages, which again is sort of that stage above the beginner content, but gets you up the blade of the hockey stick before you can approach the sort of authentic content for which there's a tremendous amount of resources available on the internet, podcasts and audiobooks and stuff.
One final question, right down here, okay.
So as you just mentioned, most languages that people like to learn do have a tremendous amount of high-level material on the internet. What can someone do if they're learning a language that's too small or barely even written and doesn't have anything such?
Well, I don't know which language you were referring to, but I found myself in that situation for certain languages. For example, Greek. So I went on to an outsourcing website. I found someone in Greece who, for $4 an hour, would translate all these 60 stories into Greek and record them. So that's 60 stories, socked in. If you have a language, if you can find someone, the 60 mini stories that we've written, that's free for anyone to use. You'd be quite welcome to translate them and get them recorded and use that. I did, for example, for Romanian, I got someone to transcribe Radio Romania. It's the national radio broadcaster there, and they had a great series on history, so I paid someone to transcribe them so that I could have, because I wanted audio and text. So you have to kind of get someone out there. If we were going to do, say, native languages in Canada, then I'd want to see if we couldn't find speakers of those languages and people who could transcribe them. You have to create the content. But in many languages, like Czech has phenomenal resources, Russian, Spanish, there's lots of, but where it isn't there, you just have to find people who can create material or speak to each other, do natural conversations, transcribe it, then you got the audio and the text.
Awesome. Okay, let's give a huge welcome or huge thank you to Steve. Thanks so much.